March 1923. A British aristocrat lies dying in a hotel room in Cairo. His fever rises, his skin turns pale, and as he gasps for air, he utters the words, "I have been cursed." That man was Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history, the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. And within just a few months of that discovery, he was dead. Mosquito bite turned deadly infection. That's what doctors said. But locals whispered something else, that a curse had been unleashed, a curse meant to protect the boy king's eternal rest. Even the newspapers couldn't resist. Front-page headlines screamed, "Death comes to those who disturb the tomb of a pharaoh." And suddenly, the world was captivated, not only by the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, but by the dark legend that followed it. What began as an archaeological triumph soon became a story drenched in fear, superstition, and mystery. A story that would haunt everyone involved. This is Mystery Fact File, and tonight we unravel the curse of King Tut's tomb. Let's go back to the Valley of the Kings, November 1922. A dusty desert morning when two men stood at the mouth of something that hadn't been seen in over 3,000 years. The Valley of the Kings, a place where time stands still. Golden sands stretch across the horizon, and deep beneath them lie the tombs of pharaohs, rulers once considered gods on earth. For 5 long years, British archaeologist Howard Carter had been digging here, searching, hoping, failing. He was nearly out of funds, and Lord Carnarvon, his patron, was losing patience. Then, one day in November 1922, Carter's young water boy tripped on a rock that revealed something extraordinary. The top of a hidden staircase, cut deep into the stone. Carter's heart raced. He ordered his men to clear the rubble, carefully, quietly. And at the bottom of the stairs they found a sealed doorway, bearing the royal insignia of Tutankhamun, the boy king who had ruled Egypt over 3,000 years ago. At that moment, Carter knew. He had found what generations of explorers had failed to discover, an untouched tomb. But he also knew Egyptian folklore, that the spirits of the dead did not take kindly to intruders. Every local worker in the valley knew the stories, and some refused to continue digging. Still, Carter pressed on. He sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England.
At last, have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations.
Within weeks, Lord Carnarvon arrived from England, filled with excitement. And on November 26, 1922, the two men stood before the sealed door. Carter held a small chisel, the same one his grandmother had given him when he was just a boy. He made a small hole in the plaster, lit a candle, and peered inside. Lord Carnarvon asked,
"Can you see anything?"
Carter whispered, almost trembling.
Yes, wonderful things.
Behind that door lay treasures beyond imagination. Golden statues, thrones, jewelry, chariots, and the sealed sarcophagus of a long-dead pharaoh. But among the hieroglyphs on the wall, Carter noticed something chilling. An inscription that read,
"Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king."
Was it merely a poetic warning? Or a prophecy? The discovery of King Tut's tomb became the biggest archaeological news story of the 20th century. Reporters flooded into Luxor, and every royal and scholar in Europe wanted to see the treasures with their own eyes. It was the age of adventure, of empire, of fascination with the ancient world. But beneath the celebration, something darker began to stir. A sense of dread. Whispers that perhaps this discovery had come at a terrible price. Because just months later, Lord Carnarvon, the man who made it all possible, would be dead. It began with a mosquito bite on his cheek, small, harmless. But days later, the bite became infected after he accidentally nicked it while shaving. his health quickly deteriorated. He was feverish, delirious. And on the night of April 5, 1923, as the city lights flickered outside his Cairo hotel room, Lord Carnarvon took his last breath. At that exact moment, as the story goes, all the lights in Cairo went out. Coincidence or something else? Carter refused to believe in curses, but others did. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, suggested that elemental spirits might have guarded the tomb. And newspapers across the world ran wild with the story. The Daily Express wrote, "The mummy's curse claims its first victim." It wouldn't be the last. As more people entered the tomb, photographers, assistants, officials, strange things began to happen. Pets died mysteriously, accidents occurred, and rumors began to spread, faster than sand through the desert wind. Was it all coincidence? Or had something truly supernatural been unleashed from the depths of the ancient tomb? The first death could have been an accident, the second, a coincidence. But by the time the third man died, the world was certain the curse of King Tut was real. After Lord Carnarvon's passing, Howard Carter tried to continue his work, but a heavy silence hung over the Valley of the Kings. The Egyptian workers spoke in whispers, refusing to enter certain chambers. Some claimed they heard footsteps inside the sealed tomb, even when no one was there. Local legends said that a pharaoh's spirit could take the form of a falcon, flying above the valley to watch over his resting place. And one morning, just days after the tomb was opened, Carter's beloved canary was found dead, killed by a cobra, Egypt's royal symbol. To the locals, it was a warning. The king's serpent had struck. But the deaths did not stop there. Within the next few years, a chain of strange and untimely deaths followed those connected to the discovery. George J. Gould, a wealthy visitor who toured the tomb, died of pneumonia soon after returning home. Prince Ali Kamalfami Bey of Egypt, who had visited the excavation site, was shot dead by his wife in a London hotel. And Colonel Leandre Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's own half-brother, died suddenly from blood poisoning. In total, at least 10 people linked to the opening of the tomb died within a decade. Newspapers labeled it the Pharaoh's Curse. Headlines screamed across Europe and America, "Death walks in the tomb of Tutankhamun. The mummy strikes again." It was perfect fuel for the early 20th century imagination. The world was still recovering from World War I, a time of loss, grief, and fascination with death. Seances, spiritualism, and ghost stories filled parlors and theaters. Now, here was a real curse, unfolding before everyone's eyes. But what was really happening? Doctors insisted there were logical explanations. Infection, malaria, natural causes. Howard Carter himself, the man who spent years inside the tomb, lived for another 17 years after its discovery. Still, he couldn't escape the whispers. One of Carter's assistants, Richard Bethel, was found dead in his bed at an exclusive London club in 1929, smothered. Soon after, his father, Lord Westbury, threw himself from a 7th-floor window, leaving a note that read,
"I really cannot stand any more horrors and cannot sleep."
The newspapers made sure to remind readers. Both had handled objects from Tutankhamun's tomb. And perhaps the most chilling coincidence of all, when Lord Westbury's body was returned home, his coffin rested in the same place where the artifacts of King Tut had been stored. The British Museum received countless letters demanding that Tutankhamun's treasures be sent back to Egypt, fearing the curse would follow them to London. Reporters from New York to Paris speculated wildly. Was there an ancient bacteria sealed within the tomb? Or had the priests of Amun truly invoked a curse written in the stars to guard their king? The mystery only deepened when experts translated more inscriptions from the walls of the tomb. One line reportedly read, They who enter this sacred tomb shall swiftly meet death by disease which no doctor can diagnose. The public's imagination ran wild. Every creak of a museum floorboard, every unexplained death, became proof that the pharaoh's vengeance was real. To understand the curse, we need to separate myth from evidence. Modern historians point out that by the 1920s, the press loved sensational stories. The discovery of King Tut's tomb wasn't just archaeology, it was show business. And nothing sold newspapers faster than the word curse. Still, there's one detail that even skeptics find hard to dismiss: a strange pattern in the deaths. When the tomb was opened in 1922, Howard Carter documented the names of everyone present. Over the next decade, more than a dozen of those people died early or mysteriously. Yet, when scientists analyzed the list, they found that most others lived normal lifespans. Carter, for example, lived until 1939. His secretary, his photographer, and several Egyptian workers all survived for decades. So, if the curse was real, why did it spare so many? Some scientists began to suspect a biological explanation. Inside the tomb, air had been sealed for over 3,000 years. Ancient spores, molds, or fungi could have developed, deadly to those who inhaled them. In 1986, a microbiologist at the University of Maryland examined mummies and found toxic mold spores: Aspergillus niger, Aspergillus flavus, and Stachybotrys chartarum, all capable of causing severe respiratory illness. If someone with a weak immune system inhaled that dust, they could die within weeks, symptoms eerily similar to what claimed Lord Carnarvon. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the legend didn't need proof, only fear. Yet, some details remain difficult to explain. For example, at the very moment of Carnarvon's death, his dog, back home in England, let out a terrible howl and dropped dead. Both animals and men, it seemed, felt something that night. Even stranger, when the mummy of Tutankhamun was examined in 1925, scientists found a wound on the pharaoh's left cheek, the same spot where Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite had been. An eerie coincidence, or something more. Tutankhamun himself was not a great conqueror or a powerful ruler. He ascended the throne as a child and died before he was 20. Yet, more than any other pharaoh, his story has lived on, not because of his reign, but because of what happened after his death. Some Egyptologists suggest the curse may have been a deliberate warning, a psychological barrier meant to deter tomb robbers. Ancient Egyptians took the sanctity of the afterlife seriously. They believed disturbing a mummy's rest could doom one's own soul. Hieroglyphic texts, prayers, and carvings often served as spiritual security systems. But never before had one been taken so literally or so globally as in the case of Tutankhamun. Howard Carter, until his dying day, denied that any curse existed. He saw himself as a man of science, not superstition. In his journal, he once wrote,
"The stories of the curse are pure tommyrot. Death comes to us all. It has nothing to do with an Egyptian king."
Still, when he died in 1939, his tombstone bore a simple line from the Book of the Dead. "May your spirit live, may you spend millions of years, you who love Thebes, sitting with your face to the north wind, your eyes beholding happiness." Even in death, Carter remained bound to the mystery he unearthed. Yet today, nearly a century later, scientists, historians, and believers still argue about one question: was the curse real, or the world's most famous coincidence? Because no matter how much science we use to explain it, the story endures. It haunts museum halls. It echoes through documentaries, novels, and films. And every time the golden mask of Tutankhamun catches the light, a quiet voice inside us wonders, should we have left the boy king undisturbed? The human mind has a way of creating patterns, especially when we're afraid, and sometimes those patterns become legends. As the years passed, more scientists began to dig into the truth behind the so-called Curse of the Pharaoh. They noted how newspapers had twisted facts to feed the frenzy. Lord Carnarvon's death was tragic, but not unexplainable. He had already been in poor health before traveling to Egypt. The mosquito bite that led to his infection could have happened anywhere. Still, the timing was everything. He died only months after opening the tomb. The world, already primed for mystery, filled in the blanks. The curse wasn't born from Egypt's sands. It was built in the headlines. In 1923, the New York Times ran stories describing deadly rays hidden in the tomb walls. British tabloids claimed Egyptian priests had placed radioactive stones to punish intruders. Of course, none of it was true, but truth didn't sell papers. The curse did. By the 1930s, hundreds of articles had appeared linking random deaths to Tutankhamun's tomb. Some people who had never even visited Egypt were reported as victims. Yet amid all the hysteria, a few voices urged reason. One of them was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes. Ironically, though a man of logic, Doyle publicly speculated that Carnarvon's death was the work of elemental spirits summoned by ancient priests. The remark made headlines again. The idea of supernatural revenge was irresistible, but science would soon catch up with legend. In 1971, microbiologists examined artifacts from several tombs and found that many were coated with ancient fungi and bacteria. These could have been dormant for millennia, then released when the tomb was opened. They identified spores like Aspergillus and Penicillium, the same genus known to cause lung infections. A single breath inside the sealed chambers could have triggered deadly pneumonia in someone already weakened. This theory, once dismissed, began to gain credibility. And decades later, in 1996, an epidemiologist named Dr. Mark Nelson compiled data on 44 people who had been present when Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. His conclusion was surprising.
Those who entered the tomb actually lived longer than average for their generation.
So, maybe the curse didn't kill anyone. Maybe the real curse was belief itself, the power of fear to shape reality. Fear is contagious. When the story of the curse spread across the globe, it infected minds. Every cough, every fever, every death among those connected to the tomb became proof. Psychologists call it the nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo. When people believe something will harm them, their body sometimes obeys that belief. If Carnarvon, exhausted and already sick, believed he'd angered the gods, perhaps that belief made his symptoms worse. It's not magic, it's human psychology. Still, even science can't explain everything. Because behind every logical explanation lies that one impossible coincidence that refuses to fade. The cobra that killed Carter's canary. The wound on the pharaoh's cheek, matching Carnarvon's fatal bite. The dog that howled and died at the exact moment across the sea. For skeptics, they're accidents. For believers, they're messages. And maybe, for both sides, that's what keeps the curse alive. Nearly a century has passed since the tomb of King Tut was opened, yet the story still refuses to die. In Cairo, the golden treasures of Tutankhamun now sit behind glass, illuminated under artificial light. Thousands of visitors pass by each year, staring into the painted eyes of the boy king. He does not move, but his legend does. The curse of Tutankhamun has inspired books, films, and even scientific studies. It became a mirror, reflecting humanity's fascination with the unknown. From Hollywood thrillers to documentaries, the myth evolved. Each generation retold it, sometimes with fear, sometimes with awe. But what does the curse really mean? To some, it's a story about greed, how Western explorers disturbed the sanctity of another civilization for fame and fortune. To others, it's a warning that ancient power, once awoken, can never truly be controlled. And to historians, it's a lesson in humility. Because while science can date bones, measure dust, and analyze air, it cannot always measure the weight of a mystery. Tutankhamun's tomb was not the grandest or richest in Egypt's history. Yet it remains the most famous discovery in archaeology, because it made the world confront a haunting question. What happens when we disturb the dead? When Carter first broke the tomb seal in 1922, he described seeing wonderful things. Gold, ivory, and obsidian shimmered in the flickering light of his candle. He could not have imagined that what he really uncovered was a myth that would never die. Every artifact from that tomb carries a dual legacy of history and superstition, one rooted in the sands of the Nile, the other in the imagination of humankind. And perhaps that's the real power of the curse, not in death, but in endurance. A story so strong that even time itself cannot bury it. Today, scientists continue to study the DNA of mummies, the chemistry of embalming resins, and the illnesses that plagued ancient Egypt. We now know more about Tutankhamun than any other pharaoh. He suffered from malaria, a cleft foot, and bone disorders, conditions that may have led to his early death. He was just 19 when he died, but maybe, in a strange way, his early death gave him immortality, because the curse, real or not, kept his name alive. From the tombs of Thebes to the streets of New York, his legend traveled farther than any Egyptian king ever dreamed. The curse of King Tut is not written in hieroglyphs. It lives in us, in our endless hunger to believe that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. And so, a century later, as you listen to this story, perhaps the real question isn't whether the curse is real, but whether we too would have dared to open that tomb, knowing what followed. Would you have risked it? Would you have looked inside, candle trembling in your hand, whispering the same words Howard Carter did that night? Yes, I see wonderful things. This has been Mystery Fact File. If you believe some secrets are buried for a reason, subscribe, follow, and join us again for another mystery that refuses to rest.